It's Tuesday, February 3rd, 2026. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Grant Herms. Today on the show, the Department of Justice dumps millions of pages of the Epstein files, illegally holding back millions more, and then says the truth is unknowable and no one will be held accountable. We also got some of the worst allegations yet about what Trump was allegedly involved in, as well as some very clear signs the Department of Justice is involved in covering up for the president's reputation. And I do want to warn folks up top here. Some of these details that are coming up are really upsetting and really disturbing, so if you are sensitive about things like sexual assault, abuse, child abuse, this might not be your episode. I'm not going to read every single excruciating detail, but you're going to get a good understanding about what's in these files that we've been able to find so far. Okay, when I come back, I'll get you up to speed on what you need to know about this latest Epstein files drop. Does coffee make you anxious, sweaty, unfocused, or maybe your doctor thinks you have a crippling caffeine addiction, which I am definitely not in any way referencing for my personal life? Let me turn you on to Mantra Matcha. Mantra Matcha is ceremonial-grade matcha from a private hillside in Uji, Japan. Smooth, naturally sweet, and it gives you this calm, focused energy without the jitters. It's packed with antioxidants like more than 130 times more than regular green tea, so you feel energized and you feel good. Now, the matcha flavor isn't for everybody, but good news, matcha has 6 infused flavors like banana cacao, strawberry lemon, cinnamon goji berry, and rosehip dragon fruit, which sounds like a name from Game of Thrones, but it's delicious. Plus, every box you buy helps provide a meal to a child through the No Kid Hungry program, which we love. Now, right now, listeners to Make It Make Sense can go to mantramatcha.com and use the code MIMS25 for 15% off. Now, that code also supports Make It Make Sense with a commission. That's how these things work. I got to legally tell you. But the good news is you'll help the show, you'll stay caffeinated, and maybe not too much. Again, that code at mantramatcha.com is MIMS25 for 15% off. Mantra Matcha, less chaos, more clarity, 2 things we could all use a little bit of right now. All right, let's get on with the show. On Friday last week, the Department of Justice released more than 3 million documents, 180,000 images, and more than 2,500 videos from the Epstein files. Of those pages that were quote-unquote discovered after an, again, quote, exhaustive review over the summer, which the DOJ said had been done back in July, these documents were also 6 weeks late from the legally mandated deadline for their release, which is to say the Trump administration had been actively breaking the law since December 19th. And that's not even the only way they broke the law and are still breaking the law when it comes to the release of these files, according to the law that Trump signed himself. Now, the DOJ has roughly 2 million documents of these Epstein files that it says it's not releasing. And as far as they've said, or anyone's been able to report, the DOJ hasn't explained to Congress why those pages are being held onto. Again, that's something that they're required to do by law if they're going to hold back pages. The DOJ also initially released thousands of pictures and videos where victims, many of them children and young teenage girls, were unredacted. Literally, the only thing Republicans in the House said they wanted from this release of the files was protecting kids. And on top of that, the DOJ has gone out of its way to redact some of the men in these files and photos, like the president, in some cases removing entire damning documents that mentioned him, and in a bizarre and also very telling redaction, they blacked out Trump's face in a picture that was taken at a public rally and used for a headline photo in Politico magazine in 2019, which is at least some evidence that the FBI or the DOJ had been working to remove any images of Trump, regardless of what he was doing in them, which breaks the law because redactions were only supposed to be about protecting victims, not about protecting the reputations of powerful people. And there are a lot of powerful people who are in these files who are alleging or insinuating or implicated in some of the worst things imaginable. Bill Gates allegedly discussing getting an STD from a prostitute and then giving that STD to his ex-wife, and then secretly giving his ex-wife antibiotics to clear up that STD. Elon Musk, who has posted no less than 100 times about the Epstein files in the last few days, is seen soliciting Epstein for an invite to the sex trafficker's wildest parties where Musk says he wants to let loose. He sent that email 4 years after Epstein pleaded guilty to being a pedophile in a prostitution case in Florida where he solicited an underage girl. There are disturbing new photos of former Prince Andrew, the royal family, the lawyer Alan Dershowitz, economist Larry Summers, and yes, Bill Clinton, who we'll talk about in a little bit, although none of them seem to be overly redacted in these files. The man who is Trump. And even with those redactions, Trump is still mentioned thousands and thousands of times in these documents in some really extremely disturbing allegations, many of them made directly to the FBI in sworn statements. Now, that doesn't make them true. When people sign sworn affidavits, they're really just saying they aren't knowingly lying, but it also seems like these statements weren't ever really investigated by anyone. And that's something that I'm going to get to at the end of this episode, because I do want to talk about what's alleged in files about Trump. Because just a few days ago, here's what he said about those files aboard Air Force One.
Myself, but I was told by some very important people that not only does it absolve me, it's the opposite of what people were hoping, the radical left.
Absolved. That's not just saying he didn't do anything wrong. That means that the files actually prove that he didn't do anything wrong in some way. Also, not for nothing, but in that video there, Susie Wiles is just creeping over his shoulder, and that is a woman, the chief of staff of the White House, that we have not seen in quite some time, so it's interesting that she was there. But anyway, it couldn't be further from the truth that these files prove that Trump didn't do anything wrong. And before I lay out some of these allegations, again, we are talking about the trafficking and abuse of kids here, so just another warning. Despite Trump saying he and Epstein had a falling out in the early 2000s, around 2004, the two seemed to remain very close, according to these documents. An email from a redacted person appearing to be close to Trump invited Epstein to Mar-a-Lago in 2012. Epstein admitted to soliciting sex from a minor in 2008. Emails back and forth between Epstein and a redacted email talk about bringing two black girls to some kind of party or property, and Epstein tells them not to because Trump would be there, saying Trump calls black girls boogers and won't go within 10 feet of them. That was in 2013. According to a confidential human source for the FBI, they said Trump was at Epstein's for lunch in the spring of 2015, so just a few months before he would first run for president, starting in June. So Trump appears to be lying about when he stopped being friends with Epstein, and was between 4 and 7 years after Epstein was known to be a pedophile who engaged in sex trafficking, was still friends with him and saw him somewhat regularly. And then we got to the really terrible stuff. And I want to remind you, Trump said these documents absolved him of any wrongdoing. There's an allegation that was made about Trump in the early 90s or late 80s by a woman who said her friend told her that when she was 13 or 14 years old, Trump forced her into giving him oral sex, and that she was then also abused by Epstein. In an email from Jeffrey Epstein, he talks about Trump having sex with a young teenager at Epstein's house in 1993 around at least one witness. The Southern District of Florida, in prosecuting Epstein, laid out an incident in which Trump repeatedly attempted to force a girl's or a woman's head, it's not clear how old she is, down onto his exposed penis, which she then bit, before Trump would later introduce that woman or that girl to Epstein, who asked Trump if she was a good one, and Trump replies, yes. Another woman said that when she was 13, she was auctioned off by Donald Trump to a room full of people that included Elon Musk, Epstein, Don Jr., Ivanka, and other older men, in which Trump would then bring out what he called the calendar girls, these children, before inspecting their genitals with his fingers inside and out. The woman also said that Trump raped her when she was 13. Trump is also accused of drugging and raping a woman in the files who was later found dead. The implication of that allegation is that Trump was somehow involved in that death. And a sworn affidavit of a woman who worked for Epstein said that she witnessed Trump tell a girl that he'd already made another 12-year-old disappear and that he could kill this other girl's entire family. And then in one last signed complaint, a witness said in 1995 and 1996 that Trump ran a sex trafficking ring out of his golf course in Rancho Palo Verdes, California. That ring was run by Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's accomplice, who is currently serving 20 years in federal prison for sex trafficking, and whom Trump's Department of Justice mysteriously had her transferred to a very cushy prison in which she is allowed to have snacks for guests and was allowed to have a puppy. In that same complaint, that witness said they watched Robin Leach, the guy who used to host Lifestyles the Rich and Famous, strangle a girl at Trump's golf course, only then to be told by Trump's head of security at the time that if she ever talked, she'd end up as fertilizer on the back 9 holes like the others. I know, all of that is a lot to take in, so just hit pause if you have to and sit with that for a second and come back. And I do need to say that these are allegations, but they also seem to have never been vetted, despite some of them being forwarded or told directly to the FBI or the DOJ. And that's what I want to talk about next here, because more than half of the things that I just told you have now been removed from the DOJ website and the collection of the Epstein files that are there. There are still screenshots, and they're all over the internet, but the DOJ seems to clearly have removed them in some way to protect the president. When he was asked in his press conference last week about bringing people to justice or even just public accountability, Todd Blanche, the Deputy Attorney General who was in charge of the Epstein files and who was, up until he got that job, Trump's personal attorney, said this. And just for some transparency, I'm splicing this answer together to keep it short, but you're not missing any context.
Going to learn the identities of the men who abused the girls with the information that you're releasing? And if not, why not? And then I have a quick follow-up.
I mean, you just baked in an assumption into your question that I have never said and I don't know to be true. Is the public going to learn about men that abuse these girls? Like, what does that mean? I mean, I don't understand what that means. Earlier, there's this built-in assumption that somehow there's this hidden tranche of information of men that we know about that we're covering up or that we're choosing not to prosecute. That is not the case. I don't know whether there are men out there that abuse these women. If we learn about information and evidence that allows us to prosecute them, you better believe we will. But I don't think that the public or you all are going to uncover men within the Epstein files that abuse women, unfortunately.
Then is the Department of Justice, having knowledge of allegations of child sexual abuse, rape, and murder, saying, we're not going to do our job. You're never going to know. We're never going to know. And I know that some of these things are likely past their statute of limitations or when you can prosecute someone for a crime, but murder never runs out. That should be an open investigation, like today. And then we got this over the weekend, the new spin from the administration.
Who partied with Epstein and engaged in, relations with minors will be prosecuted.
Well,
Any
look,
chance?
I'll never say no, and we will always investigate any evidence of misconduct. But as you know, it is not a crime to party with Mr. Epstein, and so as horrible as it's not a crime to email with Mr. Epstein. And
again, Todd Blanche there, except he's wrong, because if partying with Epstein also included partying with underage girls who were there because they were trafficked, it is in fact a crime. And because of that, people like Senator Ted Lieu have called on Todd Blanche to resign.
Not correct. If Jeffrey Epstein was human trafficking minors for these sex parties, and you show up and patronize the establishment at that party, yes, you're guilty, because patronizing is part of the law, of the federal sex trafficking law. So Deputy General Todd Blanche just got that wrong, which maybe explains why they aren't investigating all these folks, including Donald Trump. He needs to read the law and investigate these people. He also needs to resign, not only for not knowing the law, but a massive, not only screw up, but the biggest privacy violation in history. They release a lot of pictures of minors unredacted, just violated the privacy of these girls.
Now, Leo isn't the only one, but also the Senate and Congress aren't blameless here either. Congress has the ability to haul people before them to get to the bottom of what happened and the levels of government that Epstein's crimes might have climbed to. In fact, just today, former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton have agreed to testify before Congress at the end of the month after some pretty nasty back and forth with House Republicans. Now, Congress could, if they wanted, subpoena everyone who is alive and named in those documents to testify either behind closed doors or in public. They've already done that with some people. But the Republicans are targeting the Clintons here publicly because the president hates them, despite being friends with them and apparently close with them for decades. So far, Trump has not answered any direct questions about any of the allegations from any of the Epstein files. Not from the White House press corps and not from Congress. And I don't mean your reaction, sir, to the latest release. I mean, what did your head of security mean by fertilizer like the others on the back nine? Did you tell a girl you could kill her whole family and kill her like you did another? Why would you be inviting Jeffrey Epstein to Mar-a-Lago in 2012, 8 years after you said you stopped talking to him, or be seen eating lunch with him 11 years after you said you kicked him out of your club? Those things need to be answered, and maybe he'll say nothing, but it's worth asking those questions as directly as possible on camera. And the fact that it hasn't been done yet is mind-boggling to me. It's also not like having a sitting president get killed by Congress is new. It's rare, I'll give you that, but it's not like it's never been done before. Lincoln did it, Woodrow Wilson did it, Gerald Ford did it. So there's some real precedent for this here. Here's Democratic Representative Jim McGovern talking about having the president answer those questions today.
There's millions more documents that have still not been released. And if the logic here is that anyone with ties to Epstein should answer questions about what they knew, I'm all for it. The Clintons want to cooperate. They sent written declarations of what they knew, and they were negotiating to testify under oath. When will President Trump testify? His name appears 5,361 times in the documents released so far. 5,361 times. Democrats want answers from everyone, including and up to the current president of the United States.
And there is a pretty good chance that Democrats win control of the House in November, and that means we might end up having hearings with Trump. But we should also see people like Don Jr., Ivanka, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, and the many others who are in these documents be brought before Congress, but not just them either. There are real questions that need to be posed to members of Democratic administrations that were in office while Epstein was running his rings, particularly Merrick Garland, Joe Biden's Attorney General, and Eric Holder, Obama's second-term Attorney General. Presumably, they also had access to all of these files and complaints and sworn affidavits and didn't investigate. Now, back in October, both of those men said they didn't have any knowledge of the Epstein files, and their subpoenas, which were issued by Republicans in Congress to testify in front of them, were withdrawn, which, make of that what you want, I guess, but we are talking about millions of pages of documents that have been produced during an initial investigation into Epstein that happened under Obama, and then when calls to release the files exploded onto the national stage under Joe Biden. It's kind of hard to believe that neither man knew about these files. And questions about why need to get answered. By now, it's pretty clear that Jeffrey Epstein was embedded among some of the most powerful people on the planet for decades, and was allowed to repeatedly abuse women and children, possibly even kill them, at the allowance of those powerful people, some even allegedly clamoring to be involved. And until we get many answers, as many as possible, about this, victims, survivors, the American people are never going to get anything that looks like justice here. Okay, that is it for today's episode. I know this one was a heavy one, so I'm going to cut it a little short here. Please rate or review the show wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a comment below. It really helps boost the show on whatever platform you watch it on. I don't know why, but just how this works. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I've got a brand new story coming out tomorrow just for paid subscribers. You can also get access to the Things You Forgot from Civics Class newsletter, where this week I explain how exactly the government does make its budget, because it's not the same thing as you or me making a budget in our checking account. But to get access to that, you got to be a paid subscriber. It is just $5 a month to start there, or you can get an annual subscription for $50 for the entire year. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Grant_Herms on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you on Thursday.